Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Arun Gupta. I am the Vice President and General Manager for Open Ecosystem Team at Intel. You can find all about us at open.intel.com. We have a wonderful podcast as well. You can watch that at open.intel.com/podcast. And let us know if you would like to be a guest on that podcast. We would love to host you there. Today, I'm super excited to have Justin Cormack, CTO of Docker, with me on the call. Hi, Justin.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Lovely to speak here. And I'm very proudly wearing my Docker captain's jacket because this is one of those prized possessions. Gosh, almost more than a decade ago, actually, is when I started writing about Docker. And before the Docker Captains program became Docker Captains, it was a Docker Blogger program. That's how I got pulled into Docker. And I have some really fond, very personal memories of engaging with Docker. So tell me what's going on with the company, and so tell me first about the company, and then tell me about your role as a CTO of Docker, the company.
Yeah, so I mean, Docker's, as you kind of allude to, there's quite a long history now. Our 10th birthday was 2 years, so we're coming up to 12 in March. Next month we celebrate our birthday. The birthday is really celebrated when Solomon Hykes did his his speech at PyCon, where he had 5 minutes to demo Docker for the first time. It's a great recording. You should look it up on YouTube. It's actually really fun because they literally only give him 5 minutes, and he has so much to show, and everyone's so excited about Docker. And you can see in that demo most of kind of the key points of Docker. It's very early on. Some of it's still not there. Doesn't have Docker Hub yet at that point, if I remember. But that was when Docker was actually made open sourced at that point. So Docker's been around as Docker for 12 years. It came out of Doc Cloud, which was a hosting service, and the kind of but they kind of realized that Docker was actually the more interesting bit than the actual hosting service, and kind of pivoted into the product in that kind of fun kind of let's pivot out of one thing into another kind of way.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And were you part of the dot cloud team, or you
No,
joined later
no,
on?
I joined a few years later, so I started my career at Docker as an engineer. I worked on the first product I built was Docker Desktop at the time, and it was really quite exciting joining the team. It still had that kind of early days feel, but Docker was obviously growing quite fast at the time, and it was a really exciting period to join, because that was really when the whole cloud native ecosystem was starting to really take off and expand, and the ecosystem around Docker was growing, and that time was really quite an amazing way to see how one new idea could explode into a huge community of people all innovating around this new area.
Absolutely. And I remember, those early days when you were building Docker Desktop. I remember those Slack messages back and forth between us, that here is a feature that I would like to do, and here is how it would work, and here is what's not working, and where can I find the logs? How can I make a simplified user experience? Docker has definitely changed, the landscape of. It's sort of the tipping point on how simple and how easy application development, deployment, scaling could work. That's sort of how I see Docker as. And maybe I'm biased, I'm a Docker captain too, but that's sort of how I see it. Do you see it differently? Do customers tell you differently?
I think it's interesting how the view of what the kind of key things about Docker are has changed over time. And I think that when it started, there were all these eternal conversations about containers versus VMs. And that kind of really turned out not to be the interesting conversation to have. And it really was all about, faster deployment, helping developers build applications more effectively, deploy them effectively, work in, it's kind of hard to remember now, but Docker grew up at the same time as microservices, and it was part of that. And as companies were really expanding the number of developers they had, and really wanted to, work more effectively with lots of people, deploying applications fast, and the whole continuous deployment book, Jez Humpel's book, that's about the same age as Docker, I think. It's like that, again, it's all that period about like we can make software easier to deploy, easier to understand, easier to scale, and fast, and not wait months to deploy features, but deploy them every day, and those changes. And Docker's community is very much that community.
Yeah. Well, I remember Solomon's keynote at one of the DockerCons, and I remember he started the keynote saying that Docker wants to be the tool that want to get out of your way. Whatever you are working, we want to simplify that and get out of the way. So whether talk about CI/CD, whether you are using Jenkins, whether you're using GitHub, whether you're using GitLab, whether you're using Visual Studio, whether you're using VS Code, IntelliJ, it doesn't matter. We just want to be present over there and get out of the way so that we can simplify the task for you. And that's sort of how and why I believe Docker just exploded on the developer community.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. I mean, I think the developers kind of saw that experience of like the immediate, like what it could do for them. But then, as you say, it can also disappear. Like if you look underneath, all the developer tools now, pretty much there's Docker in there. People are using Docker. I think you look at things like code spaces and things like that, development environments in the cloud, and those are running Docker. CI environments are running Docker. Like it's everywhere, because it's just this really convenient and way of actually making everything uniform, and packaging your application in a way that's universal and repeatable and controllable and manageable, and you can manage the life cycle of it as well.
Right. Well, I mean, Docker reached this Linux moment too fast. If you think about Linux was growing over a period of time, and then it exploded on the scene. I think Docker has a lot shorter cycle in terms of explosion in that sense. And now you're right. It is such a commodity, such a pervasive technology anywhere and everywhere. How people are leveraging it in a very intense way is just quite exciting. What is your role as a day-to-day role as a CTO of Docker?
Yeah, so the CTO role is a fun one, because it's really varied. I've been CTO for 3 years now. It was not something I expected when I started at Docker, when Solomon was still running the business. But I think that I have a lot of different kinds of role. I was on the Cloud Native Computing Foundation Technical Oversight Committee until I'm just rolling off after doing that for 4 years, for example. So I've been very involved with with that broader Cloud Native community and Docker's relationship with the partners and the open source projects we work with, and the rest of the ecosystem. I'm also I spend a bunch of time thinking about future product directions and where we're going with everything from WebAssembly, artificial intelligence, all sorts of kind of new areas. And I'm also I'm a kind of I'm involved a lot in terms of how product and technology work together, and how we should think about these things and work with them, work together to build products on in this technology ecosystem.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I can imagine it's quite a fulfilling role, and in that capacity, you're probably talking to a lot of customers who are doing a lot of exciting stuff. Now, Docker, the company, it went through a change. About 3-4 years ago, part of the company was sold off to Mirantis, and then that was sort of the Swarm side of the business, where you were doing all that orchestration and all. And then the Docker, the company, continues to focus on the developer tooling. Tell me how that shift is coming along.
Yeah, I think that it was obviously it was quite a difficult transition at the time, and but I think that it was really an opportunity to focus on our core audience. And I think when you kind of look back, the people who were enthusiastic about Docker all the way through were the developers, and they were using Docker in all sorts of interesting ways. And we kind of focused because it seemed the natural thing to do on the orchestration production side business. It was sort of where we kind of felt the money was at the time, and it was Swarm and also Kubernetes. But that business was also really where the cloud providers were really strong, and our users were, the early adopters of Docker were also early adopters of cloud. So it was a really weird kind of relationship we had, that we were often trying to sell Docker to people who didn't actually use it. And they were trying to, they thought they wanted to adopt Docker, but it was a very slow adoption process. Whereas our users who were already using Docker weren't really the customers for that product. So it was a very strange thing. And when we restructured the business, we really focused on serving the customers who were really embedded and deeply using Docker, and so that was where that developer focus came from. And it really felt like going back to our core community again, and really trying to work out what they needed, how to help them, how to build a business for those people. So it really felt like kind of going home back to our real core community again.
That's wonderful. And I remember, when the Mirantis separation happened, Docker, the company, was down to 70 odd people at that time.
Yeah.
And over the last 3-4 years, the company has grown dramatically.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're up to around 500 people now, I think. So, and we've, and it's the latest. I see Sergio is on the call, but yes, Test Containers is our latest acquisition. So we've kind of joined up with a few other companies that have been in this ecosystem, that have, share our values, come from this open source and open technology to build, and building businesses around that. And so it's really exciting to, we're growing into these new areas as well, but it's all still focused on that developer story.
So talk to me, what is sort of the current focus of Docker, the company? The company has grown dramatically. By the way, I do want to share one thing. There was a report that came out. OpenLogic has done this state of open source report for several years. The 2024 version came out, and it shows that the Docker usage nearly doubled from 26% to 44.6%, with expansion in every region around the world. So that's exciting. That is quite exciting, honestly, in my opinion. And then I saw a more recent Stack Overflow developer survey. And again, there is talking about how Docker is the most favorite tool for developers. So talk to me, with that as a background, what's sort of the focus of the company? What are the core focus areas for Docker, the company, today?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, as you can see, like people are still adopting containers and adopting Docker, like as you can see from those growth figures. Like it's kind of, sometimes you think that when you're closely involved in this ecosystem that everyone's adopted containers, but actually, it's not true at all. And people are still, it takes time for people to adopt changes in technology. It's like, the whole kind of got on the hype curve, and you've got to get through that, and you've got to work out how you get from where you were to where you want to be. And so we're still there helping people actually grow into Docker for the first time. And it's really, it's really fascinating talking to companies, and we spend time on helping them through this adoption curve. Kind of now it's still really, really important, and providing them the tools and expertise they need in order to transform into the kind of business that the future's unevenly distributed, as the saying goes. We kind of know a lot what that what that ecosystem looks like in a company now, but we're still helping people get there. And I think that showing people where the best practices are, showing them, how to get started, how to build their first deployment pipeline that they can replicate many times, and how to do it really well. That's really important. And I think, we're really trying to build tools to, help people get started and then help them through that whole journey. And so, we've been expanding into different areas. I mentioned test containers, Atomic Jar we acquired. They're a lovely tool to make testing applications end to end that are containerized easier. They came out of the Java space. I know you're a big Java person back, but it's widely used in lots of different ecosystems. Really helps people build tests around to help them understand that their applications are going to be reliable when deployed, kind of with end-to-end tests. We've got a software supply chain piece because, applications now are built from 90% or 95% external dependencies now, and understanding what those are is and whether how to manage them is really difficult. And so we built this tool called Docker Scout. That's really it's a supply chain database, really, because one of the things about containers that's really important is that they're kind of immutable from build to production. So you can understand just by looking at the kind of the hash of the container in production, which container it is, where it was built. There's a whole set of metadata that we're helping you add at build time and so on, so you can actually understand more what's in your container, understand that you've got something running in production and a new vulnerability has come out, and you can see immediately where to remediate that, how to redeploy through which team needs to do the work, and so on. So there's a whole set of tooling just to kind of use that promise that containers had of this whole immutable deployment flow with metadata and structure around it to show that to help you actually understand what's going on in production more easily. So we're building tools around that. We've just launched Docker Build Cloud, which is a service for building containers, and because some of these new products we've been people have been telling us that their applications are kind of large and difficult to build and manage on local machines, on local desktop machines, and they actually want to transparently burst to the cloud to actually use cloud resources, and maybe use GPUs or any other kind of resources to build things that or run applications that are just too big to fit on their desktop machines, and so that they can help understand again the production environment, replicate the production environment for debugging and things more effectively. And then we're building lots of productivity tools. We released Docker Debug recently, which lets you, lots of people have very minimal containers with no tools in, and lets you dynamically add tools to containers without rebuilding them. There's kind of Docker Compose has been a really strong. I mean, again, that was an open source project that was Docker's first acquisition back in 2014, I think, when it was Fig, and then became Docker Compose. And it's still that's still a tool that a vast majority of developers developing containerized applications use to test things locally and build things locally, even if they're deploying to Kubernetes. Kubernetes Compose gives them a local, easy to run kind of model there, and so we've been building lots more functionality around Compose as well. So there's really a lot of tools to kind of help you get from get your applications into production more easily.
Yeah, so I can see a very strong emphasis, as you talked about Docker Scout, which is software supply chain, build transparency in that. Docker Build Cloud, which allows you to scale your builds, productivity tools, more tooling around Compose. And I remember writing those original Fig files when the acquisition was made. Gosh, that's quite a memory lane. Test containers. I'm also one of the Java champions. And I remember when Test Containers was acquired by Docker Cloud, there were lots of congratulation emails going to the Test Containers folks. So really good. you mentioned about, you in your role, you also look at but connection with other technologies. Tell me how Docker is looking at, for example, uh, support in the GPU side of the world. What's going on in that effort?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, more and more of our customers are building things with AI, and so GPUs are becoming, increasingly important for all sorts of workloads. And there was a little trend towards that before, when but obviously in the last year or so, it's really taken off. And so we've got, I think the container ecosystem was originally about containerizing kind of CPU applications. It was originally an Intel x86 ecosystem. It became a slightly broader, like Intel and ARM ecosystem, as originally with Raspberry Pis, and then with Apple developer laptops, and then some with ARM cloud servers. So it became a kind of it became a multi-architecture CPU ecosystem over time, and we added the support for that many years ago. When it was still kind of early, and it's become easier to do multi-architecture, but it's really only very recently that there's this kind of demand to expand to the kind of broader GPU and broader accelerator ecosystem. And it's been a little bit, it's a little bit painful in a way, because those technologies are kind of complicated and they're much less standardized, obviously, than the x86 Linux. We had one platform for basically a couple of decades, and then ARM sort of added a little bit on there, but it was quite similar. GPU is much more different, and so there's quite a lot of work to do there still. We're so we've been doing a number of different things. I think that on Linux, GPUs are quite well supported with Docker, and have been for a while. The tooling was quite messy, but it's much easier now than it used to be. For developers on WSL2, so the NVIDIA GPUs work well on WSL2, but other things are kind of difficult at the moment. And in production, it's kind of, again, it's the Linux setup, so it's kind of workable, but complicated, and there's a lot you have to know to do these things. But we're also experimenting with different things. We're experimenting at the moment, and we've got some prototypes working in-house now around WebGPU. WebGPU is a portable standard that runs across GPUs, which was designed for the browser ecosystem, and it's shipping now in both Chrome and Firefox, and coming to Safari soon, including on mobile. So it's quite widely used, although it's still very new. And that's designed to give a kind of sandboxed, portable runtime that will run on any GPU. And it's quite, and it's designed. It was originally designed to accelerate, obviously, the browser workloads, but it's actually something you can actually run locally. And so we've been running it with Docker Desktop connected to that, so you can run a GPU workload such as an AI model from a container with acceleration on any GPU that's on your laptop, regardless of which manufacturer it is. And it gives you sandboxing. So that's one approach. It's been an interesting journey. There's still a lot of software support that's missing for that, but it's starting to come because people want to run applications in the browser. So there's more frameworks for adding WebGPU support. So that's quite promising. But we're also, we're also just working with improving the documentation and support for the things that there are now around for how you run GPUs, just just those kinds of things, because the instructions of just quite complicated, and it's a lot of people struggle to get started and things like that. So we're also working on that, and we're also looking at ways you can integrate other kinds of runtimes. So when we built something that we'll talk about in a minute, probably called the Docker Gen AI stack, and we worked with Alama on that because they have a model that lets you run local LLM models using the GPU drivers from your native GPU driver stack. So Metal on OS X and different backends on different platforms. So it's not portable, but it's in the same way as Web GPU, but it's quite well supported on different platforms. So my dream is that we get to a point where you can just run a GPU application, and it's portable and it works. But there's a way to, regardless of which GPU you have, and but there's a lot of infrastructure kind of work in the way of, making that actually easy, and portability layers and all the software and kind of understanding of what the model should look like before that's kind of trivial. But there's also a lot of, there's a lot of interest in the ecosystem and, using different GPUs from different manufacturers that are less supply constrained and less potentially than NVIDIA. And there's a lot of innovation in that space in terms of different types of non-GPU accelerator like TPUs and lots of new startups doing custom silicon and lots of different architectural models. I mean, the GPU is architecturally much less uniform than the CPU. So it's a real, and I know that Intel's been trying to break through into the GPU space in a big way for a number of years with a number of different technologies. I mean, even AVX 512 came out of an early GPU experiment at Intel and went into the CPU instead. So there's been a lot of iteration on that there. So it's a really interesting space. And I think, we are just seeing that there are whole classes of applications that don't work on CPUs and need these accelerators. And GPUs aren't the only accelerators. There's a general need to support more diverse compute. So I think that there's a lot of work to do in the container ecosystem to get to where it's kind of easy, but it's happening.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because GPUs is where a lot of this acceleration happens. I mean, if you think in terms of companies that are creating LLMs, large language models, foundation models, or companies that are fine-tuning, and the companies that are inferencing, the companies that are inferencing are far more. So the actual LLM creation or the fine-tuning, the training part of it is what requires GPU, but the inferencing could mostly be done on a CPU. So I think that's where I can see that the web GPU work that they talked about, the Gen AI stack that he talked about, that's where the training could be used. But Docker runs very well on a CPU, and so that doing the inferencing should still work very well, though, right?
It seems it varies a lot depending on the kind of model sizes, I think, as well. I mean, I think that some of the LLM models that kind of do need GPU, but then a lot of it's memory bandwidth driven, not compute driven, and it's a very it's kind of very fluid situation, and people are working out how to optimize things much better for CPU versus GPU and memory bandwidth and memory sizes. And so it's a really fascinating kind of very fluid situation right now, and it's kind of hard to judge, but it's also kind of interesting, and like we've got another driver for more compute, and more compute, it always leads to really interesting applications using more compute down the road. So it's also really kind of exciting for the kinds of things we're going to be able to build with using these tools.
That's right. Talk to me more about the Docker Gen AI stack. What is it? What are the components? How can developers use it? So walk me through that part.
Yeah, so we started this really a few months ago because like people were just telling us that they were develop. What really happened with language models is that people got really excited after ChatGPT came out, or even before that, with the image models. But people were really, really excited about the kinds of things they could do and the kinds of applications. They really wanted to experiment and work out how to do these things. And a lot of the, that was when it moved from only people doing AI were, data scientists and, people who were in that community, to there's a whole new lot of people who were like just excited developers who wanted to try stuff out. And that was really our kind of target audience, was how to move from, reading about something to being able to actually try it out and build an application. So we built this stack with we launched DockerCon with LangChain and Neo4j as basically as an open source get started kind of model where you could like build a RAG application. So RAG is retrieval augmented generation, and it's something that like people have a lot of people have wanted to try out because it's kind of a very powerful thing. It's where you take a customized data, set of knowledge of some sort, like it could just be a PDF document, or it could be a whole set of it could be your entire wiki, or it could be your documentation or something, and you use that to enhance the queries an LLM's asking by giving it additional context of things that are not in its base set of knowledge. So, for example, if you ask ChatGPT, especially when it came out about Docker, it'll tell you a lot of things about Docker, but it won't know any of the new features that were launched in the last week because and it might not know a lot about best practices and ways and things like that. But you can enhance this with this RAG technique, and a lot of people have been doing this because it just gives you dramatically better results. And so we just built this stack as a fully open source. Give this a go. It'll give you an idea about what you can do. It's got lots of samples, and you can just really design to play, and you can just get it up with Docker Compose up, and there's a lot of these different example applications that you can try out. That are really the classic cases that support agent that can answer questions. They're kind of the classic things that people want to experiment with, just to see like what difference does it make adding my own data, what kind of questions work, what doesn't work, those kinds of things. So it's really was to accelerate that getting started and understanding how this new type of application worked for these developers, really who are familiar with Docker container tools, Docker Compose, but they want to understand and learn how to build these new apps. Because we're really seeing people wanting to incorporate AI into the existing applications they're building, or build new little tools, and and just try and work out how to even think about these things. There's a lot of experimentation going on, and we really wanted to support that. And now we're kind of thinking about what are the next steps with this. Like, do we think about how you make it more production quality, and how do you update the data in it, and how do you deploy it? There's a bunch of areas we might go to down there, but there's also like, do we add other tools and things to it? Like, and so we've been getting a lot of really good feedback from people using it about the kinds of things they'd like to see, and from partners wanting to work with it.
But so I see it has 4 core components. There's Docker, there is LangChain, there is Ollama, and there is Neo4j. So I understand the purpose of LangChain because that's an LLM wrapper. You could talk to Ollama, which is your local model that you have downloaded, or you could talk to some other LLM if you need to. What's the purpose of Neo4j?
Yeah, so Neo4j is being used as a vector database. So a vector database is basically for the RAG piece, for the retrieval augmented generation. It's where you store.
Database.
Yeah. So it's being used as that. I mean, I think that there's the vector database and kind of LLM storage space has been a really interesting area, isn't it? There's a lot of big explosion in kind of solutions around that. It's still it's still quite an exciting space. There's a lot of new products, a lot of existing products added support. I think that Neo4j is a nice starting point. It has got nice kind of it's a graph database, so it's kind of got a nice visualization of how things cluster and which things are related, which is actually kind of useful for understanding.
Got it. Yeah, I did not know the part that Neo4j. I mean, like over the last 4 weeks, I've had multiple vector database companies come on the show here. We had Milvus, we had Pinecone, all of these talk about what their vector database capabilities are. And I've always known Neo4j to be a graph database. But now, like, of course, everybody is adding vector database capabilities in there. So it kind of makes sense. So you got Docker for the actual containerization. You got Olama, which is your local model, that is an open source model that you've incorporated in there. Then you got LangChain as a LLM wrapper, and then you got Neo4j for your RAG. So it's a full stack, essentially, that you can do into your development, build your application. It is using Docker Compose. So kind of your usual tooling that you are aware and familiar with. And then same thing, development part is easy. What does it take to take it into production?
Yeah, so I think that we've got a little bit more work to do on the production stack for that. It kind of depends a bit on what kind of whether you want to use. I mean, we actually support local models, or you can use ChatGPT if you want. So if you're using ChatGPT, hosting is actually very similar to a normal container application. If you want to use an open source like hosted model, you've got to actually think about that'll may need a GPU, in which case you've got to have a hosting environment with GPU support. But there's also more issues around, like, you've got to scale that. So you need potentially you've got to scale that for the number of customer simultaneous sessions you're expecting and things like that. So there's a bit of work to do in terms of potentially scaling that if it's a big scale out application. But if it's a small scale thing, that's maybe less of an issue. But you could so there's a few options there depending on how you want to kind of on your kind of requirements as you were saying. It's all about like what kind of inference requirements you actually have and what kind of scale you want to do it at. So you may want an auto scaling type setup with GPUs, but something like that is you might want to run Kubernetes GPUs or a cloud server. There's a number of options there.
Got it. Yeah, but it gives you a flavor, as you want to start building your application, that this is what a potential stack could look like, what the touch points are, what the integrations look like. And then, this is where I guess customers can work with the Docker, the company, that, hey, I'm taking this into production, and here is the observation that I'm having, and help me take this into production, kind of a thing.
Yeah. I think we're absolutely. I mean, I think there's still a lot of I think we're thinking, as I said, of doing more work on production setups for that, because people are interested, and it's something that we started very much with a development focus of like understand how how you can use this to learn about the capabilities and the kind of data sets you need and things like that. But there's a number of other, there's a whole process you have to go through about updating the data. And there's, kind of other tools you might need to actually manage that process that need to be in the stack in a production thing as set up as well, that we, so you can keep the, as you update your documentation, the documents are re-indexed for the vector data into the vector database, and all those pieces of flow that are not really in there at the moment as well. So there's a bit of extra work to do. So
got it.
Pull request accepted, but we're also planning to think about working on that.
No, of course,
more to show how those parts of the architecture work as well.
Wonderful. Well, I have a little bit of a time later this afternoon, so I think you are motivating me to play with Gen AI Stack now, and I'm going to give it a shot, run it on my M1 Max, and see how it behaves and how it goes. I'll definitely be dropping a note on that afterwards. One of the technologies you also mentioned earlier that you're looking at is WebAssembly. What is the Docker and WebAssembly connection, and how are you looking at it right now?
Yeah, so it's WebAssembly is interesting. I mean, WebAssembly, from as you can tell from the name, kind of came out of the web community as a way of running more complex applications that weren't necessarily written in JavaScript in the browser. But there's also a big community around using this for server-side applications. So we've been working with the community for a while. We've added support for a lot of the existing WebAssembly runtimes into Docker Desktop so that you can easily try stuff out. There's basically, we've added to the kind of, the standards around how containers run so that you can just run them in a standard container stack. So people can experiment with these WebAssembly applications easily. I think that there's a lot of iteration in the community around the types of APIs, because WebAssemblies are on its own, it doesn't have any particular set of interfaces, but in the browser, there's the set of, kind of APIs with JavaScript, which then have APIs with, there's this kind of, the browser has a standard set of APIs in a sense. On the server, there's it's been a more gradual process of building consensus around what the APIs for WebAssembly should look like. So people have been working on WASI, which is a kind of a standard that evolved in a kind of long, complex way from a bunch of stuff that we used to have in unikernels and before, similar to that. It's a weird story, but it's it's a kind of restricted version of the kind of Unix APIs. But it's been there's a lot of evolution, and the community's been very been working towards a kind of strong consensus about what things should look like, keeping the security boundaries that the browser has, and so on. So that's why we support multiple runtimes, because they've been experimenting in different ways with interfaces that are not yet standardized, but they're kind of working towards a standardization model around this, and really experimenting around the kinds of use cases where WebAssembly is kind of interesting and different, and like trying to find its place in the world, I think. And I think there's a bunch of use cases that people are using in things like Fastly and Cloudflare. Cloudflare have CDN type programming environments based on WebAssembly. It's interesting for things that want to start up fast. There's a lot more support for it in language ecosystems than there was a few years ago, because that was a real barrier. So it's kind of it's still evolving, but it's I think a lot of people compared WebAssembly to containers because it looks slightly similar in the sense it's a runtime, and it has a security boundary, and it's quite it's kind of a similar sort of universally type runtime as containers, but I think we're still exploring around where the sort of deep value is, which are the applications in which it's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, I remember talking to Michael Irwin, who's at Docker, about how there are instructions, how you could create like a simple WASM module and package it up as a container, but that's what the instructions that somebody has to follow. But I can imagine a native integration is only going to help benefit and developers much more. So I'm glad that is something close to heart, and that's something that you're looking at it. There's a program called as Docker Sponsored Open Source Program. So talk to me about that. What is that program?
Yeah, so it's always been the case that like lots and lots of people who are building open source projects use Docker Hub. Docker Hub has always been the primary distribution point for for open public container images, and for a long time this just happened, and it was kind of just a thing, but we decided it would be really helpful to actually kind of have an official program, and give people on the open source program, kind of even more benefits. So we for example, we don't rate limit, or we give them free accounts. We don't rate limit them. We give them access now to Docker Scout so that they can to help them analyze security vulnerabilities if they in their images and help remediate them, which lots of them are doing. We've had this great program of having them speak at conferences like DockerCon and online events, and that they're doing all sorts of really exciting things, and so that we're really trying to build this kind of community, really expand the community around, so that they can learn from each other, learn what they're doing. There's kind of sub communities in things like medical research and other areas where people are using similar types of tools. They've discovered the benefits of containerization. They're for whether it be for reproducibility in scientific research, or because they're or just people who have built a cool project that they want to get out to more people. And we we highlight these projects in Docker Hub, and we make them easier to find, and we write blog posts about people's stories about the things they've done to help other people learn. So it's it's really I think it's been a good thing to have an official program. And then obviously you don't have to join the program, but it's kind of it definitely helps us understand where people are coming from, what the things that people are doing in the community with open source and Docker are.
Why would somebody not join the program? I mean, it seems like there's a marketing benefit, there are technical benefits, there are
no reason not to, really.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think they should be really promoted far and wide, that why Docker is doing this, because you want to enable and empower developers. It kind of goes back to the roots of the Docker, the company, that, hey, we want to enable more developers, empower them more. So this is one more effort that we are working out over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I missed some of the comments here. So Sergey, hey, Sergey, is saying Arun and Justin, two of my favorite people. Nice. Well, we love you too as well. There is another comment here which talks about, by the way, Arun, you probably will be happy to hear that more Java is happening at Docker. So maybe, Justin, you can provide some more color to that. What Java is happening at Docker?
Well, I mean, as I said, we just before around Christmas, we acquired Atomic Jar, which is the makers of test containers, and they're they're very deeply embedded in the Java community. That's where they came from. It's where they first started using test containers. I mean, if you don't know test containers, test containers is a framework for writing tests that use containers. It's kind of it's open source, and there's a test containers cloud product that helps you accelerate running those tests in the cloud. But a lot of people have this problem that they want to write tests against some kind of thing. Maybe you want to write tests against your database, or you want directly rather than a mock, because you're doing something that you really want, or you want to test your application kind of end to end, or you want to use something like you want to use some of the something in a, you want to use Redis, or you'll use it as part of your stack, and you want to test that it's working as you expect there, or you want to use something like LocalStack that emulates the AWS, so you can run against something that looks like S3 in your tests, or against kind of EC2 API. There's all sorts of reasons why like using something in a container in your tests is really useful. And so test containers is really a framework just to make that really, really, really easy. And so you can just create the services you need in Docker, build them up, test them without any kind of, you don't need to know much. You don't really need to know much about Docker. You just need to know how to write a test, and you just have an extra library in your native language that can add these things to your tests. So it's very, very simple. It's being integrated into a lot of frameworks like Spring Boot and things. So it's in a kind of part of the way of doing stuff in many of these communities, but it's just really, really useful. And so that Java community, I mean, the Java community, as you know, a lot of Java people have always been big users of Docker. And actually, I mean, it's been interesting how Spring in particular has really embraced containerization and building it into the flow really natively as well in recent years, and it's kind of interesting. But like I think but that's what Sergio is referring to in terms of like having that Java community internally at Docker. Now lots of them who came from Atomic Jar kind of bringing more Java love into the organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right, because a few weeks ago, I actually had Josh Long, who is the most prolific, Spring advocate. He came on the show as well, and he talked about how do you create, LLMs using cloud native Java. And he, of course, leveraged the Docker technology over there quite extensively. So in that sense, I'm very aware, and it does, always warms my heart knowing that there is more Java happening at Docker, because I remember I created the original, I wrote the very first version of Java and Docker workshop, and which got converted into the formal instructions at docs.docker.com. So I'm quite excited about that. There are folks signing in from Poland. So hi, Carol. There is Pavel, love Docker. I think this sentiment really captures, how people feel about Docker. That there is always that, independent of how the company has gone through ups and downs, and that's normal for any company, Docker always had that developer love, that this is what company is for. And I'm really glad in that sense the company is going back to its roots. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the Stack Overflow survey. I mean, 2 years in a row, we've been the most loved tool. I mean, I think that, that's not going away. We're more and more people are still discovering Docker, and discovering that it's just it's that simplicity, that kind of original magic that brought us in a decade ago. Like it's still just as real. And I think that it's interesting how developers love tools, but it's unusual to have tools that go through such a long period of this deep love, and people new people, and it's just still amazing to watch new people discovering Docker for the first time, and understanding why it's useful for them, and why it's helping them. And it's exciting having that that journey still happening. And it's the community has changed because it's grown. I mean, I remember, when I started Docker, it was still very niche, and it was still very much an early adopter thing. And we were all excited by it, but we were early adopters, and we were very much in that community. But over the years, it's gone out to millions and millions of new developers who are not early adopters at all, and they're much more varied in terms of the kinds of things they're doing, and they've all discovered that that Docker's for them, and that's really magical. And it's really keeps the inspiration for kind of working at Docker and making it better for people, and making it still making it easier, making it possible to do new things like GPUs that we're talking about, keeping that simplicity all the way, but enabling new audiences and new things, new applications to be created every day.
That is fantastic. Thank you for all those wonderful comments here. Justin, I really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I didn't ask today?
I mean, I think that we got a question actually.
Oh, there you go. Okay, let me bring that. Perfect.
We just
So how are you convincing managers or higher management in bigger organizations to actually adopt Docker at this level is often a matter of Excel sheet numbers. And this goes back to the point that you were saying, that we may be living in our cocoon. We think everybody in the world is containerized, but there are far more people who are not aware of this containerization concept. And there is still trepidation in their mind that, oh, Docker means something's going to go away. So help answer Pavel this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that mostly when we're talking to higher management and larger organizations, Docker is a strategic thing, and containers is a strategic thing. Like they've got that strategic model of why it's important, and it's it's often connected, but not always, to moving to the cloud. And it's kind of part of that journey. But it's becoming using modern, efficient development practices that enable applications to be shipped more easily, more quickly, more reliably, higher quality, better security, and because organizations, like, software is becoming more and more important part of organizations even now. Like, it's been again, it seems to have been a long time, but and containers are just a much more efficient way to organize your applications when you have a lot of applications, a lot of developers, a complex organization. Microservices arose around the whole kind of idea about like how to have more efficient development teams, keeping the cognitive load to something that you can understand, so that there's not this, you're not overwhelmed by this complexity. And I think that the management, understand those things. These are things that are pretty well understood, and there are many examples of early adopter companies that have had those benefits, seen that process. Yes, some of the very early ones kind of had to go through a lot of the growing pains of it being difficult and messy at the start, but it's now pretty well understood what these processes are. So I think that I think there's it becomes having that strategic conversation. When do you want to do this? What are the benefits? What do we have to do? What has to change? What are the preconditions? I think that for some organizations that different things drive it. We've had a lot of organizations actually kind of push the button just because of things like they know that their developers love Docker and want to use it, and they want to be able to hire developers, which is difficult. And like, if they tell their developers they're coming into an environment where you do everything very slowly and painfully, and you can't use the tools that help you be more productive, that's going to be a difficult sell for people and a difficult hiring. But other times it's more planning around a move to the cloud, moving out of your local data centers, things like that. And then so it's often constrained by kind of the kind of speed at which you can move applications. Again, that moving applications is getting much easier, but it's like I think there's a lot there. And as if else just commented, so definitely good luck. And if you want to send a message, I'm sure we can come and help talk to your managers. And because it's a lot of what we do is working with these organizations to understand how to implement their strategy around Docker.
Yeah, Pavel, by all means, please reach out to Justin directly, or there are a bunch of Docker captains who would be able to convince your management as well, kind of build that case. I mean, at this point, really what I would think is, unless a developer is living under a rock for the last 10 years, everybody would have at least heard of the technology, Docker, on what Docker is and how it changes it. Whether they have adopted it yet or not is a different point. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. And lots of developers have tried it at home. They've tried it for their personal projects. They understand how it works. But and most organizations have some footprint, but it's maybe 1 or 2%. And like
Right.
the next step is like understanding how to get from 2% to 5% to 10% to 20% to 50%. It's that journey. Is hard for many organizations to plan. To do, and especially for existing applications, not, because most of the time you're working with existing applications, not new applications.
Right. No, fantastic. Justin, I will always have that warm and fuzzy feeling for Docker, the company and the technology, because I was counting a long time ago, and I think I've written about 200 plus blogs in early days of Docker, and I've written a few books around the topic as well. So I think I've always had that warm and fuzzy feeling. Anything else you want to add at the last minute?
No, I mean, it's been great to catch up with you again, and and thank you for all your contributions over all this time. I mean, it's been a great
Absolutely. Well, I wish you good luck personally and the company a very good luck, because you are on a mission to solve and make developers' life easy. And that's a hard problem to solve, but that's why Docker is doing it. Otherwise, everybody would have else done it. So wish you good luck. Thank you so much for being on the stream. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.